When we have God with us, that always is a blessing. I don't think I ever made. I don't think I made it to chapter 7 last time, did I? I can't hear you. Oh, okay. So we did 7 verse 1 through 5 and then we quit. I think I need y'all to pray for me. All right. I want to welcome anybody that's listening to us on YouTube tonight for our Bible study. We are located at 28906 East Admiral Place in Catoosa, Oklahoma. We are Redemption Life Center. Our Wednesday night services start at 7:30 normally, and our Sunday morning services start at 10:30 in the morning. And we just want to welcome you to our Bible study. We've been studying in Gideon in Judges 6, chapter 6 through 8. And I think, even though it might be a repeat, we're going to start with chapter 7 and start with verse 1. Josie, did you say you are or are not reading tonight? You can? Okay. All right. Dave normally reads with the King James Version, and Josie reads with the New Living Word, and I read with the Amplified, and we compare the three of them and read a few verses and discuss it, and then do it again. And so we've been discussing how Gideon was told by an angel of the Lord that he was the great man of valor. My tongue's twisted too. I definitely need your prayers tonight. But anyway, so at first he put out a fleece because he wasn't sure if this angel of the Lord was of God, the true and living God. Anyway, he did what he was supposed to, and he tore down the idols there, and that were to other gods, and like he was told to do by the angel, he and his men did. Anyway, when he put out the fleece and did 2 different trials of it to test to see if it was God that was speaking to him and telling him to do this, he finally came to the conclusion that this angel was of God and was instructing him from God, and that with God he could do this because he didn't have any confidence in himself. And so let's read verses. Yeah, let's read verses 1 through 7, if you would, please, Dave.
Then Jerubbaal who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee, and of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that lappeth up the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knee to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300, but all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand. Let all the other people go, every man unto his house.
Okay. Josie, if you would, verses 1 through 7.
Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, his other name, and his army got an early start and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them, down in the valley beside the hill of Morah. The Lord then said to Gideon, there are too many of you. I can't let all of you fight the Midianites, for then the people of Israel will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Send home any of your men who are timid and frightened. So 22,000 of them left, and only 10,000 remained who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I'll show you which ones shall go with you, and which ones shall not. So Gideon assembled them at the water where the Lord told him, divided them into two groups, decided by the way they drank. In group one will be all the men who kept the water in their hands to get it to their mouths and lap it like dogs. In group two will be those who kneel with their mouth in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others drank with their mouths to the stream. I'll conquer the Midianites with these 300, the Lord told Gideon. Send all the others home.
Okay. Thank you, both. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel boast about themselves against me, saying, my own hand has delivered me. So now proclaim in the ears of the men, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him turn back and depart from Mount Gilead, And 22,000 of the men returned, but 10,000 remained. And the Lord said to Gideon, the men are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And he of whom I say to you, this man shall go with you, shall go with you. And he of whom I say to you, this man shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the men down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps up the water with his tongue as a dog laps it, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who bows down on his knees to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down their knees, down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 who lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the others return, every man to his own home. All right, what comments do we have? Does anything stick out in anybody's mind in particular? Well, I'll go on ahead and give my comments then. I find it amazing that in the previous chapter, I don't know if they gave it a number or not, but there were so many of the enemies that it was scary to think about fighting them. In this chapter, we find out they originally had about 32,000 men in their army, and God had Gideon and his group send send anybody that was fearful and timid, lacking in confidence or whatever. He had them sent home. Well, there was 22,000 of them, so that was about 2/3 of what the army was. That was already, in their minds, smaller than the enemy's army. So then you have 10,000 people left, 10,000 men. And you'd think in the natural that would be scary enough. But God wanted to make sure that these men knew that he was the one that gave them the ability to win this battle. And so he told Gideon, when they went down to drink water, that the ones that lapped like a dog, that put their head into the water, over to the water, and just drank that way, to send them home. But the ones that were watchful, that would pick it up with their hands so they could still keep an eye out on what was going on, that they would stay and fight, and that was down to 300 men. Now, I don't know about you, but in the natural, I'd be shaking in my boots. If I wasn't amongst the ones that were fearful that left the first time around, they were told to leave, I would have been tempted to go about then for sure. I would have said, well, I didn't think we could make it with the original amount, and then all these people left, and you're saying that you're going to cause us to win this battle with 300 men. The key there is God. God is the one that made it possible. And there's many other stories in the scripture where the circumstances were arranged to where no one could explain winning the battle except for it had to be God. And that's the way he likes it. Oh, because we need to learn to trust and obey God, don't we? So he didn't want anybody that was fearful He wanted the bold and the brave and the courageous, and he didn't want anybody that wouldn't be watchful, aware of their surroundings, so that the enemy couldn't just sneak up on them. And so he eliminated all but 300. Can you imagine that? That's amazing. Anyway, 300 sounds like a lot until you consider that the enemy army was bigger than the 32,000 that they started out with. And then it doesn't seem like very much. All right. Dave, if you would start reading with verse 8, and I'll have to tell you when to stop.
So the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host, and thou shalt hear what they say. And afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then went he down with Phurah his servant into the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came into a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along. And the fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon the son of Joaz, a man of Israel. For unto his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the hosts. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian.
That's a good place to stop right there. Thank you, Dave. Okay, Josie, verse 8 through 15, please.
So after Gideon had collected all the clay jars and trumpets they had among them, he sent them
Are
home.
you starting in 8?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just reads so different from verse 8.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Leaving only 300 men with him. During the night, when the Midianites camped in the valley just below, the Lord said to Gideon, Get up, take your troops and attack the Midianites, for I will cause you to defeat them. But if you are afraid, first go down to the camp alone, take along your servant Peru, if you like, and listen to what they are saying down there. You will be greatly encouraged and be eager to attack. So he took Peru, or whatever, and crept down through the darkness to the outposts of the enemy camp. The vast armies of Midian, Amalek, and the other nations of the Mideast were crowded across the valley like locusts, yes, like the sand upon the seashore, and there were too many camels even to count. Gideon crept up to one of the tents just as a man inside and wakened from a nightmare, and was telling his tent mate about it. I had this strange dream, he was saying, and there was the huge loaf of barley bread that came tumbling down into our camp. It hit our tent and knocked it flat. The other soldier replied, "Your dream can mean only one thing, Gideon. The son of Wallace, the Israeli, is going to come and massacre all the allied forces of Midian." When Gideon heard the dream and the interpretation, all he could do was just stand there worshiping God. Then he returned to his men and shouted, "Get up, for the Lord is going to use you to conquer all the vast armies of Midian."
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it is quite a bit different, but yet the same story. It's a little bit more embellished, isn't it? So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man, to his home, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was below him in the valley. That same night the Lord said to Gideon, "Arise, go down against their camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you fear to go down, go with Purah your servant down to the camp, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the camp of the armed men. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east lay along the valley like locusts for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand on the seashore for multitude. When Gideon arrived, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade, and he said, "Behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it down so that it fell, and turned it upside down so that it lay flat." His comrade replied, "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has given Midian and all the host." When Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped and returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given into your hand the host of Midian." Any comments?
Well, I guess God is letting him know that he is in control, in spite of verse 12 talking about all that, you know, all the multitudes, it's just vast. So there's no doubt that God is with him.
Very good. Any other comment? That explains too why God understood that Gideon needed a little bit more encouragement before he led the men against the Midianites and the enemies. Because in the natural, we tend to look with our eyes, don't we? And with their eyes, there were so numerous amounts of the men and the animals that would be used in fighting against them that you couldn't count them. And with the eyes, it looked impossible. But our God loves to do the impossible, doesn't he? He is bigger than all of our problems. He is bigger than any army that can come against us. He is bigger than any storm that can come against us. He is our defender. He's our shield. He's our buckler. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that at the moment. Let's go to verse 10. And let me see. Let's go on ahead and read verse 10 through the last verse of that chapter, which is 25. If you would, please, Dave. Oh, I can't read
Yeah, we
I
were
can't.
at
It is
16.
16. It's 16. You're right. I had a line there, and the line went over the top part of the 6. All right. So verses 16 through 25.
And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise, and behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with a trumpet, and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but nearly set the watch. And they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 300 and the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers and held the lamps in the left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Beth-shittah in Zerah, and to the border of Abel-Maholah, unto Tobath, or Tabath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side Jordan.
Okay. Josie?
He divided the 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a trumpet and a clay jar with a torch in it. Then he explained his plan. When we arrive at the outer guard post of the camp, he told them, Do just as I do. As soon as I and the men in my group blow our trumpets, you blow yours on the sides of the camp and shout, We fight for God and for Gideon. It was just after midnight and a change of guards when Gideon and the 100 men with him crept to the outer edge of the camp of Midian. Suddenly they blew their trumpets and broke their clay jars so that their torches blazed into the night. Then the other 200 of his men did the same, blowing the trumpets in their right hands and holding the flaming torches in their left hands, all shouting for the Lord and for Gideon. Then they just stood and watched as the whole vast enemy army began rushing around in a panic, shouting and running away. For in the confusion the Lord caused the enemy troops to begin fighting and killing each other from one end of the camp to the other, and they fled into the night to places as far away as Gideon near Zerah, and to the border of Amialola near Tabbath. Then Gideon sent for the troops of Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and told them to come and chase and destroy the fleeing army of Midian. Gideon also sent messengers through the hill of country of Ephraim, summoning troops who seized the fords of the Jordan River at Meth-mahal, thus preventing the Midianites from escaping by going across. Orah and Zeb, the two generals of Midian, were captured. Orah was killed at the rock, now known by his name, and Zeb at the wine presses of Zeb, as it is now called, and the Israelites took the heads of Orah and Zeb across the Jordan to Gideon.
Okay, thank you. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put into the hands of all of them trumpets and empty pitchers with torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, "Look at me, then do likewise. When I come to the edge of their camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you blow the trumpets on every side of all the camp, and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon." So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when the guards had just been changed, and they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and scattered the pitchers, holding the torches in their left hands, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow, leaving no chance to use swords. And they cried, "The sword for the Lord and Gideon." They stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the Midianite army ran. They cried out and fled. When Gideon's men blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every Midianite sword against his comrade and against all the army, and the army fled as far as Bethshittah toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called together out of Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all the country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and take all of their intervening fords as far as Bethbarah and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were gathered together and took all the fords as far as Bethbarah and also the Jordan. And the men of Ephraim took the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon beyond the Jordan. What comments do you have over all of that?
Well, as you just read, all the 300 did was blow trumpets. Or was that it? They're 300?
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards, they gathered up all these other people to go after the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
So for some reason, The 300 means something. Blowing trumpets, just 300 for some reason.
Well, I haven't really studied it that much, but I would love to hear what one of our preachers, Robin or John, would have to say about that, but I don't direct them as to what they preach. God does. But that would be interesting to study. I do know that it looks to me like, or sounds to me like, they had a third of the 100 men on 1/3 of the portion around the camp, another third around another portion of the camp, and then the last third around the other portion of the camp. So like all 300 of them were surrounding the entire camp that they were at. And when they came upon, when they all did it together, they had a trumpet in one hand and a pitcher with torches, by the sounds of it, in the other hand. And they blew the trumpets all at once, and then they smashed the pitchers, which would make a terrible sound, and the torches within the pitchers, when the pitchers were smashed, would make a flash, which was rather scary. That was back before bombs and all that, so it was probably pretty scary. Just the sound was scary. And even though there's only 300 of them, it was enough to make a big noise and a big showing. And Gideon's army didn't even have to use any swords, because the people got confused, the enemies got confused and started killing each other. And then, of course, there was more that supported the enemies outside of this camp. And I got the impression that they sent word to others that were not with those 300, which maybe that was all it took to give the ones who were fearful and were sent back. Maybe that was enough to give them the courage to fight the remnants. But anyway, that's what it sounds like, so that they got all of the enemy, it sounds like. And then the two leaders, Oreb and Zeb, I think it was, they beheaded them and took the heads to Gideon as proof that even the leaders were no longer alive. And so God got the glory, because when you think of a battle, you don't think of just blowing trumpets and breaking pitchers and letting the torches fall and blaze out. And she said, you don't think that way. So God got the glory, because nobody had to, other than cutting off the head of the leaders, nobody had to use a sword as far as Gideon's army was concerned. So I just found that to be quite interesting. I mean, how can you argue after being a part of that, or witnessing that, or being told that? How can you argue that anything but God was behind it?
Well, it was that night, too, and they got mixed up and confused, like I said, and since they didn't have light themselves, maybe, they didn't have a good enough plan, even though they had a lot of people. They ended up not knowing who they were fighting. They were fighting amongst themselves, and so that just confused everything and took their lives, I guess. And it was a good plan to have torches and noise, I guess, all around, thinking that they had a lot of multitude after them.
That's right. It made it sound like there was a bigger army out there. And those flashes of light, since they didn't understand what was going on, had to be confusing. And what is neat is Gideon's army was not confused by the light, because they knew what it was from. But the enemy was confused by it. And like with it being in the darkness and these flashes of light, that had to make it even more confusing, to where they, we were blinded part of the time with the flashes of light, so they couldn't really tell who they were striking and who they weren't. So anyway, however way you want to view it, it was a miracle from God, and it was conducted by God, and it worked because Gideon, even though he took a little bit of convincing, did what God told him to do, and he had his people do it, and they obeyed him. And so it was a team effort, but yet in a way that only God could get the glory for it. So I just praise the Lord for that. God likes to take something that seems too small and do great things with it. It spoke to me. I mean, our church is really small, but that doesn't mean God can't do great things with our little church. And you stop and think about it, even though we're small, there's people that never go through our doors that do view the shows that Dave videotapes and puts on YouTube. And, God made that possible. God gave Dave the ability to do that. He provided one way or another through different ones, and some of things he provided Dave with, and the knowledge he gave Dave the ability to get the knowledge to do that. And I wouldn't know where to even begin on something like that. So, to God be the glory, great things he has done. And I love it when the only explanation is, but God. There were more people there of the enemies than what would be possible for the original Israeli army to do, let alone just 300 men, but God. And little as much when God is in it. He took David in the Bible when he was just like a teenager that hadn't even gotten his muscles fully developed yet. He was so petite in stature that when he tried to put on an adult armor, it was too much for him. It was too heavy. He couldn't do it. And so God, through David, defeated Goliath, because Goliath said, if anybody can defeat me, our army will serve your army. Well, David defeated him, even though people were making fun of him. Even his own family made fun of him. Who do you think you are? Well, it didn't matter who he thought he was. He was doing what God told him to do, and if God was for him, who could be against him? If God did it through him, it would be done. And David had the trust and was able to obey. Just like Gideon, now it took him a little while to trust. Well, it did David too at first, because he had to have experience with defeating the lion and the bear through the power of God that gave him the courage to face Goliath. So anyway, these stories and there's others in the scriptures of people who, just ordinary people like you and me. They weren't anything special, except for that God made them special by choosing them, because he chooses those who are willing, those who will do what he tells them to do, those who are willing. And sometimes it takes them a little while to be willing, because they have to be convinced that this is God. And with God, all things are possible. But it did happen. And I just think that's awesome. There's several preachers that some I have known and some I didn't know but I knew of, who, according to the world, did not have the education or the following or this or that or the other or the money or whatever to have the ministry that they have. But God enabled them to. And a lot of them flat out make it public. They didn't even graduate from high school. Now, that's not putting down education. That's just saying the education alone will not help you get the victory. God's the one that helps you get the victory in whatever way he chooses for it to happen. And so I give God the glory and the praise, and I think that's awesome. We have one more chapter I was wanting to go over that I think we'll wait till next week. And Lord willing, we'll work on Judges chapter 8 before we change our subject. But it's still concerning Gideon. And so we'll see what happens in Judges 8. And if you're excited and curious to know, you can read it yourself and see what you think. All right. Are there any other comments that have been thought of since I started talking?
Well, I know this one thing. If God tells you to do it, you really should do it. And I believe that, there's certain people that on the main line, like Gideon, and they have to not go with fear. They have to go with what God tells them to do, So, best offer.
That's very good. That is true. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be the strongest. All you have to do is be willing to obey God and do what he tells you to do. When you trust and obey what he says, and you're willing to do it his way and not say, oh, well, I think I've got a better way than you. As you have seen in scriptures where different ones thought they had a better idea, and God may have used their idea to win some victories, but the main victory came from doing it God's way. But also when they didn't do it God's way, there was trouble that came along. So they still had to deal with trouble on top of everything. So anyway, we just need to remember that old song, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Because God loves us. His love is bigger and wider and deeper. Jim was always preaching on that. He worded it a little bit different, but his love is fuller than anything we can imagine. It's more wonderful than anything we can imagine. It's when he does something or has us do something or allows things to happen to us, it's not because he's mad at us. It's because he loves us and uses those things to make and mold us into the person he would have us to be. And sometimes some bad things happen. I mean, just like the diamond, if it had feelings, in order to get it to look so beautiful that it would fit in a ring and be valued by people, it had to have cutting away and grinding away and polishing and everything to make it look that pretty, and there's different facets in it. But if it had feelings like a human being, if it had nerves, all of that would have been very painful. But the end result was well worth it. And so, all right. Any other comments?
Don't forget the trumpet has a meaning, proclaiming the gospel or the word of God. That's...
They did speak up and say it was for the Gideon and the Lord or something like that.
There's a message with the trumpet. That's right.
And those pitchers, earthen vessels, we're a vessel too, and that little light or whatever that they had on there, and then of course the vessel was full of, I would suppose, oil, I guess it would be oil at that time. And then when that little light gets in contact after you break the whole thing, and there's all this stuff to light on fire, and it becomes brighter. So it's, there's something to say about that too.
Very good comments. Very good. All right. Do we have any prayer requests?